Pentagon says 2 U.S. Navy boats are in the custody of the Iranian military in the Persian Gulf. The ships were traveling from Kuwait to Bahrain when they were detained. Joining us from the Pentagon now is CBS News correspondent David Martin. David, what do we know?
Well, we know that the sailors are on a piece of Iranian territory in the middle of the Persian Gulf, which is called Farsi Island. It does not appear that the Iranians are holding these sailors as hostages, because they have assured the U.S. Through the State Department that the sailors are A, being well treated, and B, will be allowed to continue with their journey. But there are many questions about this that remain unanswered. One is, why were they detained if that's what they were in the first place? The working assumption here at the Pentagon, but it's only an assumption, is that those two boats somehow strayed within the territorial waters of Iran by coming within 12 miles of this place called Farsi Islands, and that's why they were detained. But as to the details of how that happened, whether shots were fired, whether the two U.S. small craft were boarded by Iranian sailors, whether this was the regular Iranian Navy or the Revolutionary Guard branch of the Iranian Navy, all those details are as yet unknown. But it does appear that the sailors are going to be allowed to continue on their way.
Yeah. Do we know, were the sailors on a training mission or what they were doing in that area?
Well, that's a fairly routine transit from Kuwait to Bahrain. I don't know if that's what they were doing or if it was a training mission. But Bahrain is where the U.S. Fifth Fleet, which is the Persian Gulf Fleet, is based. And Kuwait is a major logistical hub for operations in Iraq and throughout that whole area. So somebody traveling between Kuwait and Bahrain would be a very routine order of business.
Yeah. Does it seem unusual then that, you know, they would stray within 12 miles, or how does something like this happen in your experience,
well,
David?
If you look at the map, Farsi Island appears to be pretty well in the middle of the Persian Gulf, and it's unclear to me how a small craft would get that far out into the Gulf. But what you don't know is that there are lots of little islands in the Gulf which are claimed by various countries bordering the Gulf. And they may have unwittingly come close to a piece of land that the Iranians claim is theirs, but we just don't know what the circumstances are. And you need to put this in the context of the fact that 2 weeks ago, the day after Christmas, in fact, as the U.S. aircraft carrier, the Harry S. Truman, was transiting into the Persian Gulf, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy held a live fire exercise within 1,500 yards of the Truman, firing off rockets. It was in a different direction. They weren't coming close to aiming at the Truman, but that is, I think, in anybody's definition of normal activity in sea lanes, is a very provocative action. Now, whether this turns out to be another attempt at a provocative action by the Iranians in seizing these two American small craft remains to be seen. For now, the Pentagon seems to be going with the interpretation that these craft strayed into Iranian territorial waters. However, as of last report, they have had, here at the Pentagon, no contact with the crew. So we don't know yet the crew's side of the story.
David, I think it's interesting. After the Harry S. Truman incident that you were just talking about, there's been all this discussion about diplomacy between the United States and Iran. Does this look like, with what they're saying, that they've been in contact and Iranian officials say they know it was a mistake? Does it seem like maybe they are trying to work on that diplomacy situation in this incident after the previous?
Well, Iran is so bifurcated in who's running the show. I mean, if you're talking about the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, those are the hardliners. Those are the people who fire off rockets when the Harry S. Truman goes by.
Right.
The Iranian Navy, according to the U.S. Navy, always conducts itself very professionally in the Persian Gulf. So if this is the Iranian Navy that somehow and for some reason detained these two small boats, then this could be simply the Iranian Navy being much more moderate and much more reasonable than the Revolutionary Guards.
Okay. David Martin at the Pentagon, thanks so much for your insight.
Sure thing.
On the phone is Chris Harmer. He is a former Navy pilot and a senior naval analyst with the Institute for the Study of War. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you. I got to tell you, this is like a bad trip down memory lane for me. I've spent a lot of time in the Persian Gulf, 5 deployments there, and I spent a lot of time flying around Farsi Island. And on a number of occasions, now that I'm retired, I'm happy to say it, I violated Iranian airspace inadvertently, not by much, not with any evil intent, but it happens all the time because the airspace is so constrained, the water space is so constrained, the shipping traffic is so intense, it's almost impossible to operate in that area without momentary incursions into airspace and water space. So I think the most plausible explanation at this point, and again, this is not confirmed, this is just sort of informed commentary on my part, is that one of these small vessels had a mechanical failure. The other vessel went to assist it. They got task saturated trying to fix the vessel, the motor failed or whatever. And as a result, they didn't pay attention to their navigation and they drifted into Farsi Island water. Now, as your previous guest said, there is a difference between the Iranian Navy, the IRIN, or Islamic Republic of Iran Navy, and the IRGCN, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Navy. The Iranian Navy itself is very professional, cooperates very well with the American Navy in terms of deconflicting operations. On the other hand, the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Navy, the IRGCN, is constantly trying to incite an incident. So it's really sort of a schizophrenic approach the Iranians take to their maritime operations there, with a very professional Navy on one hand, and then sort of a religiously, theocratically led military force on the other.
So it would make sense then that maybe the Iran Navy here is the one saying, we hope to get this resolved. We think there was a mistake. And from what you're saying, it's a mistake that can happen. This isn't totally unusual.
This is not totally unusual. I mean, as far as the American side, so let's be honest with our viewers here. The Americans do conduct spying operations against the Iranians. The Iranians do conduct spying operations against the Americans. But if we're going to be spying, we're not going to be spying on Farsi Island. There's nothing really of that great interest there. We know what's there. Our aircraft can fly up to 12 miles close to it without violating Iranian airspace. We have near constant surveillance of what's going on. So it's highly unlikely that we sent 2 small surface craft to do surveillance on Farsi Island. The only thing that really makes sense is these guys were out training. They got lost. They got disabled. They drifted into Farsi Island waters. Now, if it had been the Iranian Navy, my expectation is the Iranian Navy probably would have given them a tow back down into international waters and called the U.S. Navy to come pick them up. Believe it or not, I've had those type of professional interactions with the Iranian Navy before, but because I believe this was the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps Navy, again, not confirmed my own personal commentary based on 5 deployments in the Persian Gulf, they would not want to deconflict. They would want to escalate. It also highlights the fact that Iran is not a unitary actor in terms of its internal political dynamics. You've got the moderates, you've got reformists versus hardliners, and right now this looks like it's possibly a play by the hardliners to embarrass the Americans and through that embarrass the Iranian moderates as well.
That makes sense. They're describing the crew as being safe, but is it concerning at all that we haven't had contact with this 10-member crew at this point?
No, not at all. I mean, the Iranians aren't going to let us talk to them. They're going to want to, so assuming that it's the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards Corps, that's running this situation, they're going to want to leverage this situation to do 2 things. Number one, they want to embarrass the United States. And again, there's nothing that wrong with that. I mean, that's what, we would probably take the same opportunity to embarrass the IRGC if we had it. And the other thing is they're really trying to force the hand of the moderates inside Iran. So they're going to get these sailors back. They're not going to execute them. They're not going to hang on to them for several months. They're going to get them back to U.S. custody. They're going to take their time with it, and they're not going to let us talk to them in the interim. Also, there's a separate issue here. I don't do domestic political analysis, but I do say that I think the timing on this is very suspicious. President Obama bent over backwards the Iranian moderates in terms of the nuclear deal. I know there's a lot of Iranian hardliners that are very upset about that. This might be a ploy by hardliners to torpedo, pun intended from a Navy perspective, the nuclear deal. They're doing this the day of the President's State of the Union address. I'm on the record as being opposed to the nuclear deal, but I understand that it's always better to talk than it is to fight. So you got to give President Obama credit. He tried to run a deal. He tried to embrace the moderates. I think this might be a ploy by Iranian hardliners to subjugate them, to engage in subterfuge against them.
Well, we did just yesterday, too. Iran's nuke official denied that a key reactor in the deal had been disabled at this point. So that's a very good point to possibly look into. You don't think that these 10 will be returned right away? The Iranian officials in some circles are saying that it could be within a couple hours this will all be resolved. You don't think that's going to be the case?
It could be, and I certainly hope it will be. If you think back to the beginning of the Bush administration, 2001, where there was that U.S. Navy EP-3 spy plane. They had a mid-air collision with a Chinese fighter, and then it landed, I believe, on Hainan Island, and I believe those aircrew were in Chinese custody for 10 or 12 days. Now, that's a different situation because that was specifically a spy plane, and there's a lot of secret technology on board that plane, and the Chinese obviously wanted to interrogate the crew members. So there's not that level of exploitation available to the Iranians. It's not like these 10 sailors are going to know any deep secrets about American naval operations. But I don't think the Iranians are going to be anxious to get these guys back into American custody immediately. My guess is it'll take a day or two, sort of dot the I's and cross the T's, and just let the Americans know, let us, the Americans, know that the Iranians are a viable military force, and that they're going to hang on to these guys for a little while at least, just to show us that they don't accept our hegemonic presence in the Persian Gulf.
Okay, really great perspective. Chris Harmer, Senior Naval Analyst with the Institute for the Study of War. Thanks so much for joining us.